very nice to see so many of you here. I'm Beth Perry. I'm one of the project team for the Cultural Intermediation project, and we put this session on jointly with
Understanding Everyday Participation project. So we're working on, I guess, different sides of an apparent boundary in engaging people around issues of culture and community. And so Beth's project, shall I tell him about your project, or do you want to?
Don't mind, you can hand it back. Yes, we're really co-constructing this as we go along, which is another way of saying we're winging it. No. So our project is looking at the different mechanisms, their effectiveness, the problems that they raise in trying to connect disadvantaged communities into the creative urban economy. And we're interested in the people, the organisations, the spaces, the places where these different connections take place. So we're looking at this from the point of view, I suppose, that connectivity may be a good thing, and that creative activities should be co-commissioned with different community groups. But of course, as we're doing this, we are also problematising all of those concepts that I just said. So one of the really interesting things is about the language that we use to describe our communities, to describe the processes that we use, and to describe the ultimate objectives of our research.
So our project is on the other side of intermediation, so it really looks partly at the results of interventions in communities. We ask, what do people do? What do they participate in? And insofar as its participation, is it cultural? How is cultural participation defined by the people who go about it? So it's, in a way, it's troubling the idea of a canon of cultural practices which are valuable and are given value by powerful groups, and it's finding out about what people feel matters to them in their own communities through participation.
So we've been doing some work in Birmingham and in Salford, mapping the cultural landscape of different organisations and individuals who are in this connective space. And one of the things that we've been doing is looking at how the pressures on those organisations are changing and evolving in the context of austerity and localism. And we've been looking at Birmingham and Salford, and what we wanted to do was get some of our partners here to share their own experiences of co-constructing work with communities, and to ask what are the limits to that. We've had a process prior to this session. We asked our participants, well, what does the title, The Limits of Co-Construction, mean to you? And immediately everyone said, well, we don't know if we like it, we all understand it in different ways, what do we mean by a limit? When are limits good things and when are they bad things? We asked what people wanted out of this session, and what people didn't want was a panel with rows of chairs where we all had presentations and you as the audience were invited to listen. So the first activity is to move the chairs, because we didn't want them like this. Watch the cables. Okay, thanks everybody. That looks much better. More like a circle time, how we wanted it. Now, interspersed amongst you, we have 6 invited participants. As I say, there's 3 from Greater Manchester, 2 from Birmingham, and we also have a representative of the National Fun Palaces. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone round to them to say something about who they are and why they're here, and what initiative that they've been involved in that speaks to this topic of the limits of co-construction. As we go through the discussion, we would very much like you to join in. We have done some preparation in thinking through some of the themes, but the technology's failed, so you can't see any of them. So we will be prompting and provoking as we go along in order to keep the discussion moving. But please feel free to join in. So I shall pass around this way. Okay.
You done. Hello, I'm Sandra Hall from Friction Arts. Our strapline is we make extraordinary things happen in awkward spaces. I think what's important about Friction is we have a process. We're not necessarily art form led. So the process is, who am I? Who are we together? And that can be in the form of an intervention, a street debate with poetry. It could be a number of ways to how to get to know people or a cup of tea. So who am I? Who are we? What are our agendas? What do we want to do together? And why? And only then do we choose the art form fit for purpose. So that means that we're at the same place as the community we're working with in the don't know space. And I think that resonates with them. We work hyperlocally in Birmingham. We have a space called The Edge, which is unfunded, so it's like living with a crack whore, because it just feeds off you and leaks a lot, and occasionally gets a Saturday job and fixes up, but not often enough. It is important to have a space, and then we work internationally. We're working with a couple of European cities of culture, and Brazil, and it's great.
My name's Matt Daniels, and I'm based in Birmingham. I'm a freelance consultant, and the main reason I'm here is because I've just recently completed a project. I was contracted by Birmingham City Council to do a bit of work in one of the inner city suburbs, Walsall Heath, which is incredibly diverse culturally, faith-wise, and the community there just very, very diverse. And the work that I was doing was to look at developing a cultural infrastructure of some sort, to work with community stakeholders, cultural stakeholders, and local residents. So I did a lot of work around how to engage and trying to get information from people, how to try and bring it all together into something that was vaguely coherent. And so, yeah, this will be an interesting conversation, actually, to learn as well as to share around some of the barriers that came up, as well as some of the successes.
Hello, my name's Gail Skelly and I work for Odsal Community Arts. Odsal is a very small area in Salford, very close to the inner city, and what may be described as a very, very deprived community. I didn't realise about 6 months ago, but my role is actually a cultural intermediator. So my role, it's officially project manager, but it can mean anything from making the tea to talking about strategy and writing funding bids. And my role really is to work with a team of artists and local people, groups, specific groups, to create celebratory artwork, which the whole community can participate in and enjoy. So the limits on co-construction, to me, I suppose I'd like to end it with a question. The limits to co-construction on what?
Hello, I'm Stella Duffy. I'm the founder and co-director of the Fun Palaces campaign, based on Joe Littlewood, theatre director, and Cedric Price, architect's idea for one venue to house them all. All arts, all sciences, finally democratisation. It was from 1961, and not surprisingly, it never happened. In my opinion, it has still never happened. So, on Joan Littlewood's, what would have been her centenary, which is 6th of October this year, I had the bright idea of maybe a few venues making a fun palace. I had this bright idea last year. There's now 102 places around Britain, Iceland, Berlin, Canada, and France making fun palaces. A fun palace is entirely created and curated by the community. It doesn't work if it's a venue's open day. There will be venues using it as their open day. We know that. We know that because they've already said it. But what we are after is proper, not even co-creation actually, community creation. What I've noticed is where it's really working and really taking off is where it is not artist-led. I say that as a 51-year-old who got my equity card at 18 and has been an artist for 33 years. An artist who wants to change the world, an artist who works in the world, an artist who always works with community, but where I am noticing it really happening from real community working itself for what it wants, is where the artists have got the fuck out of the way.
Hi, I'm Al Surtees. I used to head up an organisation which was Creative Industry in Salford. I'm currently freelance, but I work across film, theatre and music. And I work with a range of organisations, but pretty much everything I've done has been this whole co-construction, I would suggest. But then I also have a big issue with those terms, in that I am part of the community I live in. And the very first project I did was to work with kids on our estate. So I went out and we worked at how we might bring some money in to be able to do that. And from that, I set up a community film company, and then we set up Creative Industry in Salford, and it grew and grew and grew. And absolutely everything comes from the communities we work with. What do they want to do? How can we facilitate them to do it? And who do we need to bring in the mix to enable that to happen? The projects that I'm working on now, I'm working with an organisation that's about to become a funding body because they want to step outside the mainstream in terms of how people access funding for artistic and creative work. And they want it to be absolutely radical. So it's a no to ticking boxes for government, a no to ticking boxes for Arts Council, a yes to doing things that are a little bit cutting edge, and a yes to failing sometimes because we learn much more when we fail. I'm also setting up another charity with a friend of mine who does a lot of international development. We've got some work over in Africa, we've got work in South America, and that's expanding exponentially. We've also got a project as part of that in Croydon, which is giving us our biggest headache at the minute. And I also am co-founder of the Manchester District Music Archive, which is a completely user-led online archive of the music heritage of Manchester. So I've got lots of things that I'm really interested in. The nice thing about being freelance is I get to pick and choose what I want to work on, and it's great because most of the communities I've now connected with over the last 15, 20 years all approach me to work with them. So that's a really nice kind of mechanism, I think.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Neill. I'm editor of Salford M3 magazine. The magazine is delivered, we print 5,000 copies, it's delivered for free. And it covers an area of social housing, private ownership. It's quite a mixed social area, and we try to mix in the arts in whatever form it's going on, some commercial, some non-commercial. We work with 3 local schools on quite a lot of art projects, trying to mix them. It's 3 local schools. There's a Catholic school, Church of England school, and a state school, and they don't often mix apart from when we do the arts projects. So I'm quite proud of blending these organisations together. We've worked many times, a lot with Salford University, bringing in students into the community, working with residents, and I think the residents actually feel quite inspired when they turn up onto a housing estate they've never been on before in their lives. So it's a two-way game. Lots of the people reacted very well to having students in, creating artworks. So the whole thing is really trying to inspire our kids who don't have a lot of intention of going to university, maybe to move up one notch.
Okay, thanks everybody. We really were going to get everybody to introduce themselves, but I think we will run out of time. So instead, can you just turn to the person next to you and say who you are, where you're from, and why you wanted to come to this session? Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to give the microphone back to the panel members to pick up on some of these themes. But if you want to join in, please put your hand up and we'll move the microphone round. That's right. Okay.
So we were talking about the tension. I agree with you, Stella, but I also disagree because actually we respond to a community. We create a framework, we give it back to them, we tease it, we test it. Sometimes they're stepping into something they don't understand because I don't want to do Crayola work with people. You know, I don't want to do ABC. And sometimes when people step into a piece of work, as long as they've trusted and they know that we're not doing drive-by art, that we've taken them on this journey, then when they step into that, they go, I know what you mean now, San. And then, you know, so we were talking about, so do you want to phrase the question, actually?
Oh, it came up from your comments about the choice of art form and kind of practice being quite late on in the process. And I was quite interested in how you negotiate the tension between, say, your expertise as a practitioner that says this might be an appropriate artistic mode of expression or particular art form, and a group's desire to kind of, you know, to do theatre because they're comfortable with it, or to do visual arts because they see that as the appropriate way of expressing themselves artistically, and how you kind of, I guess, you know, deal with those points of tension.
Well, I think there's a good example. We were invited to look at the Prevent programme, Preventing Violent Extremism, and they wanted to do positive images of Muslim people, and they sort of, our colleagues, the police kind of said, well, we'd really like these positive images, and the acronym's PIMP. So we kind of maybe have to move that around. And then I really went into negotiation with the Prevent team, and I ran a series of workshops where they stepped into our practice and they stepped into our space. I said, let's hold the photographs of, black and white people together and stuff. Let's just hold that, but let's try a few things out. So I took them on some workshops, and in their offices as well. I'm very, very interested in crossing boundaries into people's offices. So I went to the Prevent team space and sort of altered that. And that started to show them that an installation might be more appropriate. The installation finally went on at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery the week that they banned the burqa. So thank you for the £50,000 worth of free advertising, Daily Mail. Barmy artists force people to wear burqas. So I suppose the thing to do is I never say no, but what I do is I try then to cross a boundary, just so that they can step into the practice, because if we just have meetings, nothing will happen.
I'm not saying the artists aren't allowed to play. All I know is that this project, which started as a thing that I thought might be an interesting thing to do, has taken off so that it's become my job, albeit because it's on Arts Council funding part-time. But it's also much more than that. What I'm seeing is that, for example, the people in Farnham who are creating the Farnham Fun Palace, and there's like 3 or 4 flagship examples. The person who said about Croydon, the Croydon Fun Palace people are amazing. I should put you in touch with those people. They're actual people. They don't work in the arts. They've heard about it from Twitter. Twitter has been astonishing. Now, I have to say, of course, Twitter often has its own demographic. We're not ignoring that. But what we've done is we've tried to just let anyone know in any way we can that this Fun Palaces project is happening. Where people have taken it up as... So the people in Farnham work in a medical repatriation company. They work shift work. The shift workers who work at night are French, Spanish, I think, Portuguese, from Ghana, someone from Sierra Leone, and 2 Brits. What they decided to do was they decided they wanted to make a fun palace. Not one of them perceives themselves to be an artist. They wanted to make a thing, or a scientist, because it's bringing arts and sciences together. They wanted to make a fun palace for Farnham because they perceived themselves to be outside. And because there were a lot of them from lots of different communities, they knew they didn't fit. What they did was they went out on the high street and they asked, how could we be more of a community? How could we help this community? And the French woman was responded to by an English person who said, you're not even from here and you care about community. And she said, the French woman, to me when she reported it, she said, I chose not to be pissed off and hurt. I chose to have a conversation. And now they're having an amazing, exciting time creating with lots of different... So like the Waterstones in Farnham has said, yes, you can use our space. And they had a difficult conversation with the Arts Centre that said, but you're not artists. Do you have permission to make a Fun Palace from Fun Palace's headquarters? Well, it's me. I'm Fun Palace's headquarters. Of course, they've bloody got permission. Anyone can do this. This is the point. My point is that where they're taking it, and they really are grassroots, because they just get this might be a good thing to do. And they don't even have a sort of thinking about good for the arts or good for sciences or good for engagement. They just want to do it. It's really blossoming. And I think, because I don't know, because this is the first time, I think we're going to have some learning from that we can then share next year from those types of people, the ones who get it in their guts first.
Sorry. Well, don't go away, because it's a question to you. Oh, yeah. It was just a quick question, which is, how did you... Oh, goodness me, guys. Shouldn't have got involved in this. My question was...
How did I?
How did you... Can we sit back up? Even
Go away.
yeah, sure. What was the question? Oh, yeah, the question was just because I resent the distinction a little bit about artists not being real people. I think that's a little bit problematic.
Well,
yeah, no, I sympathise with that. But I think the question is, well, I mean, there was also a process of facilitation, a process of engagement, whether these people took it and ran with it. So I think I'm just asking about that, acknowledging that there was that process of engaging these people who weren't engaged in the arts and asking about what that process was.
Sadly, I kind of have to say I don't really know, because no one's done this before. When Joan Littlewood tried to do it, it didn't happen. I think it didn't happen because they were desperate to make a building. And they were looking for land and a building. And we've spent too much fucking money on land and buildings, and there are all these empty spaces, that aren't used, that are empty half the time. So what we're saying is, use what you've got, try and make that work, and try and work. We've given the 5 guidelines. It has to be free. It has to be local. I made an acronym so I could remember. It has to be innovative, as in something you wouldn't normally do. It has to be transformative, transform a space, transform yourself, and it has to be engaging, whatever you perceive that to be. The facilitation was that I tweet a lot. Seriously, I tweet a lot. I like Twitter. It works for me. I follow 3,000 people. I have a huge array. If you don't like Twitter, it's because you're following the wrong people. I talk to, sorry, I will shut up. I talk to loads of these people on Twitter. That's how we met. I'm not an academic. I don't work with academics until now. I met these people on Twitter. Twitter has been my facilitation process. Next year, I'll be able to look back and see what happened. At the moment, I'm right in the middle of it, so I don't know. I'm sorry.
Just to be really clear, though, and I know you're moving on, but just to be really clear, so the people, where was the example you were talking about? Sorry. Sure. So they responded to your tweets, and that was where the relationship began.
Yeah. Sorry. You want to?
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting around where the idea comes from in the first place. And there's kind of almost like chicken and eggs. So the people in Farnham kind of responded to the Fun Palaces idea, which in essence wasn't yours, it was Joan Littlewood's. No doubt she got it from somewhere else. And I think there's something really interesting around the ownership, particularly when you're looking at models of, expertise, be that academic or artistic in a place. And I just wanted to offer a different and difficult example of where that panned out in some work that I did. So I've been working until recently in Peterborough with a project called Citizen Power. And we had 2 commissions, arts commissions, where artists were resident within a voluntary group in the city for a year. And the people who made those choices took place over about a year, where community groups were introduced gradually into what that idea might look like, who wanted to engage. And we had 2 that panned out. There's a case study I can send you to. But what's really interesting about the difference between the 2? So one was an artist who was situated within Street Pastors, which is a national organization that it's volunteers, Christian volunteers who work with the nighttime economy. And they felt that their work was invisible. So Simon Grennan, the artist, went on a lot of nighttime walks with them and spent a lot of time with them and came up with a series of cartoons that his budget then paid for to go into the newspaper without any kind of context around it, just to start to tell these stories. So in other words, that example was an artist who was engaging with a local group, took on board their ideas, but was in control of the final product. So that's one model of collaboration. The other artist, Joshua Sofer, and remember that the invitation for this came from the voluntary group as a result of a series of ideas that somewhere along the line originated probably with me. And Joshua was with this Male Residences Association, and he decided that he wasn't going to pre-plan any kind of product, because that's not what his practice is about. But his practice, he's an internationally well-known, very well-established artist. And he decided he was going to go with the flow of what this group of men wanted. And he would come up with lots of ideas with them. They would go for walks together. They would talk about how they were going to reduce the stigma with their surrounding community. But every time Joshua came up with an idea, he was subject to a wide range of kind of barriers as to why that might be possible. Sometimes those barriers were rooted in racism and fear of others not understanding them. A lot of these men have had long, difficult times in prison, have various addiction issues, and it was quite, it's not like they were a coherent, cohesive group to begin with. They just really wanted an artist to hang out with them because they felt that that would make a difference. It was as simple as that. So in the end, what Joshua did was quite a complex project, but hand on heart, I know he would say, you know what? The final product is not something I'm going to stick on my website. And that's really interesting in terms of what you were saying about where the limits are of expertise. Joshua has, 25 years in the field. He's superb. And he entered into this from a very confident place, and he's very happy with what happened. But I'm really intrigued about the difference between those two. And when you give yourself permission as an expert in whatever area, to enter in that as an equal voice in the creation of what happens. And I don't think we've got that. We've got, mostly a culture where we do it for them because it's all about them, which I think is nonsense. But how we reclaim that space when very often we are in the position of power because somewhere along the line we represent the funding as well. I think that's a really interesting conversation to have.
I think it's important to kill your darlings sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, the Croydon thing, it's not a problem because of community connection, it's a problem because of the other side of co-constructing, which is working with partners. But I'd be interested if you've got any unemployed 16 to 25-year-olds. Send them over. Yeah. So definitely pick that one up. And that was the reason why I had an issue with this whole co-construction, and it's picking up on Gail's point about co-constructing what, because there's so many layers of it between you and the funder and then you and the communities you work with. But more interestingly, is there are different models, and we've probably used them all in our practice. So it really depends on the money, except to say that projects that we've delivered, we've never had Arts Council funding. We had it once, and that was actually to help lots of small arts organisations get themselves established. And I specifically avoided artistic funding because that meant they wanted to fiddle in the art or the activity that happens. So our funding was always social funding, and it was about the groups we already worked with. And that meant that it made them completely free to decide what they wanted to do with it, which is great. And as long as we're working with the right groups, which we were, then it doesn't become a problem or an issue. So an example of that is we'd been doing some great film work, and we've established some wonderful little independent film producers. And the other side of what I like to see is communities and creatives aren't mutually exclusive. They're one and the same thing. And our creatives come from our communities, and our creatives live in those communities. And I don't think, we're not doing ourselves any favours by trying to separate the two out. And actually, you find some amazing talent in the most unusual spaces. And for me, it's about those non-traditional routes of access as well. So let's not forget that. But we got some funding from the council to work with unemployed people. We already had a group of unemployed people who wanted to do more film. So we used the money from the council and we shot a feature film. Now, I know the council would never have agreed to that, but that's what these guys wanted to do, so that's what we did. And they took every position on that shoot. Gail was even involved in that. We got her dressed up in pink pyjamas doing a whole dance routine. But it still enabled us to give the outcomes that the council were looking to do, but it left us completely free to do what those communities that we were working with wanted to do. And there are lots of ways of doing that, and it really does depend on what the funder's interested in. And the more you can, for us, it was more about steering clear of those who were all about the artistic. Because quite often, and certainly for me, process is more important than the end product. It doesn't matter what the end product looks like, it's that process of engagement that is critical.
Can I pick up on that? Matt had his hand up as well. Sorry, Matt, you go, because I'm a gobshite. Well, no, I just wanted to emphasise that actually for me one of the stakeholders is the funder, and you have to seduce with integrity in a completely different way. So they're giving you money to do something that they can't do with a community. There's a triangle there, and it's an equal one. And actually, and I think that's an incredibly important part of the gig in terms of what we were talking about at the beginning of the session, which was about models of practice, or I hate the word models, frameworks or methodologies. And if we can take them on that journey, then actually they become incredibly important allies, but they're often used to consuming. They're not used to being immersed in work like our communities are. So I end up doing a lot more work with them than I do with communities sometimes.
I just want to pick up on a couple of points that have been made, partly around the funding, but also, my experience working in Balsall Heath, which, as I said, incredibly diverse community in Birmingham, in inner city Birmingham. There is a huge amount of community activity that's going on. There's loads of really vibrant activity, loads of great grassroots partnerships. So I kind of went in from a different level, and it was looking at how we could try and, I suppose, bridge some of the gaps that there might be between the community sector, the cultural sector, the business sector. That was something that the funders, the City Council, were really interested in, how we could try and lever in some cash in a very blunt sense from the business community. So I was trying to create some of those conversations. Some were already happening, particularly between community and culture. There's the Balls of Heath Festival, which is really, really vibrant. Loads and loads of people go to that every year and participate. There's neighbourhood forums. So there is a lot of stuff going on there. And we actually found that the difficult bit was to try and have those conversations at a slightly altered level that was more strategic, that was about what could we do, how could we develop partnerships that may lead to future funding opportunities, or what kinds of things, if we pooled our resources, could we get that would benefit the community more. And there were a few things that did come up, things like a resource directory for local organisations, things as basic as who has a marquee that we could use if we wanted to put on an event somewhere else and we don't have a budget. So just sort of looking at a range of different options that were around there. But one of the biggest issues that we had, and this is why I wanted to talk about the point with funding, one of the biggest issues we had was that you needed somebody there, or you needed some people there in that community who would commit to continually pushing those boundaries, developing those partnerships, and just keeping that agenda going, really, because everybody was so busy. Everybody was competing themselves to get funding, to keep their organisation active, to deliver on projects. So it was just such a struggle, and I think a lot of people saw me coming in as that person who could keep their eye on the ball on that agenda. And that's where we found some of the difficulties, because I had a very time-limited position there, and that meant that when I was going, and it was only a 12-month role, it wasn't a long-term thing. So we found that there were issues of how we could sustain that activity and how we could keep the aspirations going that we had. So I think that's just something to be mindful of, really, when working in community, looking at the kind of stakeholders that you've got, the commitment that they can bring to it, and the commitment they have or are able to sustain beyond that point.
I think one of the best projects that we ever got involved in, and some of my colleagues around here were involved also, was something that ended up being called the Secret Garden Festival. It's what started off as a repair job on a mosaic in a park. We discovered that there was a local link to Francis Hodgson Burnett, who wrote Secret Garden. So we worked with the local schools and local arts groups around the idea of a secret garden without any sort of prescriptive ideas. And the children could paint whatever they wanted in their secret garden. So we had fairies, we had big spiders, and they were all incorporated into the mosaic. Now this kind of inspired a few people around this whole idea. Some people from the university, some people from City Council. And we actually got some funding from Salford City Council, I think 40,000, I think. And uniquely, I think, in my experience, this was shared £500 to groups all over Salford to promote whatever they considered as part of their secret garden. And this was very diverse. It could be a poem. My favourite one was a pensioner group in one of the farther stages of the city who'd been reconditioning a Wurlitzer organ. They've never had any funding, no publicity. And they became part of an established group, and it was so heartwarming when they came down to meet us all. They could print leaflets. The whole thing was so democratic, and the whole thing worked wonderfully well, I think. And the shame of it all, it's the sustainability, and everybody seems to be talking about this. We keep having projects that come to an end, and when we're trying to engage community all the time, and that's what we're all about, is that the minute the funding runs out, or that project has been finished, or the thesis has been written, it all stops. And it's very hard as a member of the community, working hard with the community, to keep people on that treadmill of keeping things going. So, I'd like to see elements of sustainability coming out of all these things, and I think we all feel the same thing about it.
So I've got queues forming up.
I'll keep it quick then. There's so much to come back on. You could spend all day talking about it, but I wanted to come back on what Matt had said about you were there for 12 months and my experience of participation is much longer. It's a sort of privilege of 10 years working in a really small community. And I think reflecting through a particular group that I work with, the difference that during that time, and not just because of the role that our organisation plays, but the role that the partnership around us plays in just that one group has just been incredible. But what I wanted to say was that sometimes co-production, participation, co-construction, it's not about the process, it's about the group. And the particular group that I work with, I've never seen a reaction. Recently, they started to work on another project, having worked on a really thorough, you could say, co-constructed project to make something together as a group. Worked beautifully. They'd used all their skills on making this. It was a banner that they were making. And then another project arrived, not quite out of the blue, but wasn't necessarily something they'd been completely involved in developing. And I was really surprised by these women who hungrily fell on a pre-templated piece of work. It was a really simple, straightforward half an hour. What do you want us to do? Right. No discussion about it. No negotiation. We'll just do it. Because for me, the process of co-construction is a continuum. And it will happen at different stages for different groups. And it's not a linear continuum either. You can go back and forwards. Groups themselves, the people that we work with, can elect to be in or out of that process. And that's fine. Hope that made sense.
My name is Kathleen, and I'm an academic, and I've enjoyed listening to all your practice and what you're involved in. There are a couple of questions that I have. One is a term that sprung to mind when I listened to everyone was a term called assemblage, which is a very popular social science term where an assemblage is composed of many parts, resources and people and whatever. And I get the feeling that you're engaged in a lot of very exciting projects, and they strike me as very much being assemblages. But my problem with assemblage is that for me it misses out agency, it misses out subjectivity. And I think, in effect, what all of you are doing through your different projects is you're not just getting a group of people together and something's happening. You're hoping that something will happen in that project that creates this spark inside that subject, that they will have an experience, take that experience and do something else in their lives with it. And so obviously you can't measure things like that, and we shouldn't do that, because if you truly respect subjectivity, then it has to evolve by itself. But, this idea of how is it possible to create those conditions where we genuinely support subjectivity and agency in people. So we're not just doing over and over again, just project after project, but something kind of exciting can come out of it.
Assemblage is a great word, which I've never heard before, thank you. I believe that everything I've heard people are talking about agency. I don't think any of us are saying that it's non-political. It seems essentially political to me to hand over the reins of production. And generally in the arts, people do not hand over the reins of production, let alone the means of production tends to be the body, the person, the self, but they don't hand over the reins. And everything that everyone's talked about to me, as an artist and as a producer, sounds to me like handing over the reins. That's not how most arts are practiced, so that does sound like agency to me. Process being more important than product. The Crystal Palace Fun Palace people are making a Fun Palace in October, but they're doing it now. They went on a picnic 2 weekends ago that they invited the whole area on. They invited a local historian, 2 bookshops, the pub owner, and a bunch of other people to come along, and they talked about what they are going to do in October with anyone who happened to come to the park. They're doing it. It is itself in its process. And sustainability, we have no funding. We have one lot of funding for this year from the Arts Council for an exceptional fund to hold it together. Most of that's going on the Digital Fun Palace website thing that people will hopefully be sharing with. I'm being paid 2 days a week and working 7, of course, like most of us. None of the individual fund palaces are funded, but they are finding interest, even though there's no money, from local councils, because it is a local council thing. And they are finding interest from the HLF, who perceive them to be doing local stuff. Interest, not tons of money, but there is some sustainability, I think. And because we're saying it's a political movement, we're saying it's going on. We're unashamedly political.
2 things, really. First of all, the sustainability point that Kevin raised. That's another word I've got a big issue with. It's a myth. Nothing is sustainable at all. And actually, projects by nature are not sustainable. Projects start, they deliver, they close. And actually what we should be thinking about is funding, and it's funding to organisations, because they're the people that make the projects happen. If you're not funding the organisation, what's the point in funding projects? And as soon as funders get their heads around that, we'll all be in a much better place. There is also this issue about proof, and can we prove it? Of course we prove it. We prove it every single day. There isn't a single project I haven't worked on where I've had to do one or other of evaluation, monitoring, blah, 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 right the way up to as high as social return on investment, where I could actually draw you a bloody diagram about the change in individuals over the time period, depending on whether it was 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years, and the difference that it made and how they valued that and where they went on to from dot to employment, whatever that might be. But I think there's such a mess and such a, I don't know even what to call it, but this whole ethos that and it's being forced down, it's not coming from our sector up, it's being forced down, of overly monitoring everything, overly evaluating everything, to the point where 10 years ago, most of the work I did was 90% actually working on the project, having some great times with the communities I work with to do stuff. Towards the end of that experience for me, I would say 70% of my time was just doing paperwork, because that's where the funders had put you, whichever fund that it was coming from. So actually the amount of time you're spending with your communities doing the stuff was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So unless we can step outside of those constraints, and that's something I'm looking to do with this new entity that we're establishing, I think we've really got a massive debate to have around sustainability. I do think it's a major myth. Arts Council talk about it all the time. Once this project's finished, how are you going to sustain it? Well, if there's no money, it's not going to be sustained. It's the organisation itself that needs to be sustained. And there are lots of ways of bringing in finance to deliver on projects, as well as, doing commercial activity. I just think that there's whole dialogues that need to happen around that.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by the discussion. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. I wanted to go back to Gail's question at the beginning. What is it you're trying to construct, let alone co-construct? And I'd also like to ask you about the methods that are used to construct whatever it is you're constructing. I mean, I think the idea of assemblage is interesting. As you say, it's very much in vogue. But I find that a very descriptive way of thinking about the social world. When you talk about nothing's sustainable, certain things are sustained, certain things do stay the same. And I'm quite interested in what goes on beneath the surface and what drives the assemblages in the particular way they're driven. So I want to find out what it is you're trying to construct, and then what your method does, because all methods perform. So could you say a bit more about that?
I think that the sustained, for me, behind it is we're sustaining models of operation that this continuous down.
So one of the arguments that comes out of actor network theory against it is that by calling the world a mess and calling it fluid, what you're doing is reproducing the interests of those who would have it fluid and a mess.
There's absolutely barking load of things in there. Number one, absolutely, in terms of... okay, so when we're working with the community, like, for instance, we opened a shop up and left it empty and said, what would you do here? And the first people in were the kids, and they said, we want to make an indoor garden. Okay, so that tells me they need sanctuary. Okay, and that's when the co-producing gets interesting for me, because I'm seeing things they haven't named, and there's something about being other So when I sort of promised not to talk about the international work here, but I think it's important. When I travel with 2 other artists. There's a black guy with a cowboy hat, there's a guy who looks like a nose-biting drug taker, and there's Gobby me. And we're just weird enough to be able to intersect and do Google Earth. So we can go on the ground with people because they just can't work out who we are, so they don't mug us. And not that everybody we work with is going to mug us, but you know what I mean. So we go to dangerous places. And then we can also look at the strategy and where that sits. So for me, the practice is listening to what's not being said, finding new places to have those conversations, and then constantly responding with either a small intervention and just checking with people that that's the way it was. So it's completely subjective and bespoke for that community at that moment. When we go back to Brazil, we'll probably do something different with the same community, but it won't be what we did the first time round. So for me, it's incredibly important to be hyper-local wherever I am. But we've also got this alchemy of 3 very strange artists that have a different skill set and don't look like artists or talk like artists that are going in to do Dr. Culture. Does that answer some of your thing? In a way?
I still don't quite know what it is you're trying to...
What we're trying to achieve, make stories visible and actually encourage people's own vernacular, not to give them a new one, but to help them find... I mean, not help them find their voice. They already have stuff. I mean, you know...
But it seems to me there's a lot implicit in here, and I would like to... I'm not going to tell you what I think the explicit story is, because it's not quite what we're trying to do, but I think there's a... You know, why is it not explicit what you're trying to do? And it's this thing about the myth of the artist as well. The myth of the artistic method, it's all in process. I've worked with so many artists where they've resisted any kind of research with them because it breaks the spell. It's about process. It happens. No, I've worked with some very good ones who then have seen and then incorporated researchers in their practice in very interesting ways. But I just wonder about this. There seems to be, what's the... The subtext here seems to be clear, but...
The first question is what?
What are you trying... What kind of world are you trying to create then?
I want to create a world where I, born on a council estate in Woolwich, don't still feel, and I do, scared going to your universities, scared rocking up at this place, and scared walking into the Royal Opera House. That's the world, and I don't believe we've begun to touch that. So when I say democratisation, I mean the whole fucking lot. And I certainly mean academia, because you guys' words terrify me. And I have to ask academics, I've had to do it twice already today, ask someone what they meant by an acronym. And really, if we could all learn to talk a little bit easier for each other, be more aware of that, that would help for a start. So I want to change the world. I want a free world and an open one, and I am an old-fashioned socialist, and I am keen on that. But similarly, if somebody said to me, what if UKIP wanted to make a fun palace? I said, well, they'd have to make it free, local, innovative, transformative and engaging, or it wouldn't be a fun palace. If they made it those things, some people would come that they would have to have a conversation with that they would be surprised by. Methodology, my truth is, we don't know. I keep saying we don't know, and that's why we're saying, please come and play with us, all of you, because we don't know what we're doing. All we know is that from having 6 people say yes, 102 have said yes. And there's more coming. And they're coming from all over the place. And what I mean by sustainable is people seem to be saying, can we do it next year? So I don't know, and I know it's Joan's idea, but Joan never did it. She never did it because Joan was so fixated on the East End and doing it there, she never gave it to the rest of the world. All we've done is say anyone can do this thing. I don't know what my methodology is other than say anyone can do this thing.
This sort of question for non-academics, and it's more, how do you guys feel about the sort of tokenistic approaches sometimes that academics can have, these lovely little projects, and sometimes, I can see you laughing, I can't think of the right word, but do you get annoyed, or is it sort of, you're giving me some money, so I may as well put up with you for a few months, and then you'll leave, and it's not really the sustainable aspect, and that sort of approaches?
I'm really glad I came to this conference because I actually managed to name that for myself yesterday, because there was a really good session where you put yourself in a line, good relationship with academics, never sort of thing. And I realised it's about time, because it's the same community. Communities that don't have a lot of money, they go, when you're doing this show then, you're doing it next month. not 2 years' time, because they have a different relationship with time. I think academics and artists have a very different relationship with time. And I named that yesterday, that means that I could slow down with you guys, but if you're going to be glacial, it's got to stop. So I think there's something fundamental there. I've been having an on-off relationship with an academic partner in Birmingham, and it's not BU, because you're great. And that's been beyond glacial. And we've been let down quite significantly a lot of times. So I've backed off. I've had much more successful academic, smaller relationships in abroad. So I think there's something there about, because we have to move fast to make things happen. We have to have multiple projects on at any one time. But I think it's really important for us to slow down, because I want to name it with somebody else, because I'm so far in it, I can't. But getting the who am I, who are we together, that came from another artist that just was hanging out with us. And he was from America. And he was going, oh, this is what I see. So he kind of gave us that. So I think it is important.
Actually, it's kind of building on what you were saying. I see that there is a huge benefit. I've not had a lot of experience of working closely with academia, so it's kind of a bit of a toe in the water for me. But I've said this to a few people, actually, and it kind of builds on your point as well, Al, about how there's so much more monitoring, evaluation expected from funders. And what you were just saying, Sandra, everything is so fast-paced. You've got to get your project up and running. You've got to deliver it. You've got to do your evaluation and monitoring. You've got to make sure it's good quality. You've got to get the right people. You've got to do your finances. So actually, it's quite nice to think that you could perhaps partner up with academia who have a specific role to look at the work that you're doing and to measure the impact and to perhaps use it as a really useful body of evidence that can either sustain the existing practice or develop it. And that's kind of, rather than the word sustainability of a particular thing, I tend to look at things in terms of what have we learned from that? How can we develop it further? How can we improve it? And then how do we create a new project out of that? So I think there are real benefits and opportunities to doing that kind of partnering and actually looking at it in a more constructive way rather than it just being an add-on or an irritation. Who's next?
Academic partnerships, and I know this isn't really responding to your question, but I've written bids with Beth's team specifically in mind because of the research practice that they're doing, completely aligning to the work that we want to do. But our bidding process is on such tight deadlines that we're not always able to respond. So it's not that there's not a will there, it's just finding a right way, because universities by nature are massive bureaucratic entities and we're small, tiny, little turn on a sixpence organisation. If we say we're going to do it, we can literally go out and do it there and then, whereas you guys might have to send it to about 10 different departments to see if you could have a meeting about whether you can do it. So that is a big problem. And it's not, and it really isn't the fact that we don't want to work with academics, because I do think that, just even though I hate to say it, it's about the validation. Why I need an academic to validate what I do, I don't know. That makes me feel, okay, something wrong with me. But funders love it, because actually if an academic said it, it must be right. But the fact that you keep saying it, oh, well, prove it. So there's got to be a way in which we can all come together and actually make this work, because it's in both sides' interests. And there is, with one of the organisations I work with, they've got a fantastic relationship with Manchester Uni, and it's all through back doors, and that's the only way we can make it work. And it is about the people. You make the right connection with the person, they'll smooth the way so you can get things done. And it is literally not that we don't have the will, it's finding that way so that we can, and I appreciate what you're saying about sometimes we need to slow down, but quite often we're reacting to situations that just blow up, and you've just got to get in there. The riots in Salford, and Gail automatically starts working on projects. Well, wait for a university to come up there. Oh, it's been and gone. So, yeah. Sorry, Gail.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to try and kill two questions with one stone, and one is about I don't know, paraphrasing how easy it is to work with or what the experience is. And I, several times in the last decade, tried to approach performing arts departments, visual arts departments in Salford University to offer an opportunity naively to say, you know, we've got a work placement opportunity here for students. And both times it just didn't happen. And so I kind of gave up at that point. And then the academic department we're working with at the moment recognised, I think, the place that a community arts organisation has in creating good co-constructive environments for people in deprived communities. So I think the reason we're doing it at the moment is because it fitted in with an abstract team. No, it fitted in with that team's need to do a particular piece of research, a particular piece at a time, and in a particular location. And I recognise that our work fits in with that. However, because they recognise that we hopefully work effectively, co-constructively, because, to be honest with you, we couldn't do the work we do. I mean, that's the whole point, really. That's what we're doing. It's just using the arts to do it. So, yeah, two birds with one stone? I think so.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you've had bad experiences. I don't always work well with academics either. I have been an insider and an outsider of academia, and I think personally I've been really reflecting over my role inside academia and what the expectations of me are within that sphere and that field. And, you know, when we write these grant applications, and, you know, the last one I wrote was 47 pages long, and I got shortlisted and I didn't get it in the end, and I was really frustrated. And it's now getting to the point where I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to ask my permission anymore from you to do what I want to do. And I think that spirit needs to be encouraged a bit more, that this kind of, you know, I don't need your money to do what I think is important, to write what I think is important. And I think that comes down to subjectivity again, like people making decisions themselves and breaking away, even if necessary, from these funding organisations that I think are holding back creativity at times.
Sorry, I'm going to quickly jump in, and I should apologise for the title of the session being called "Limits to Co-Construction," because I said, yeah, co-construction. That we should do something on that. Beth, Andy, can you sort that out? I wanted to say something about this idea of, you come to these sessions with academics and you come to universities and talking willfully impenetrable stuff, and you know, you're right, we do. And it's a learning curve for academics to try to think, well, how actually should you communicate stuff like assemblages, for example? But the flip of that, the reverse of that is that if Sandra had emailed me 4 years ago saying, hey, I'm an artist based in Derry Ends, I do this cool stuff, I'd have gone, I do not know what to do with this email and this person. And this is, because we're being filmed for AHRC, I can blow smoke up the AHRC's ass at this point and say the Connected Communities programme has in a way produced a whole group of people, both academics and community partners, who have started to interact a bit more and started to learn each other's languages, such that when I bumped into Sandra later on in this, I'm going, oh yeah, well, there's some cool stuff that we could do. And we can start that conversation even if it is sometimes glacial because of the nature of working at a university.
And I want to pick back up on what you said and what you said. I was in this massive political meeting and I said, look, just shut up, sustainability, nobody knows what it means. And actually, if I'm working with a group of autistic kids and doing arts and they stop cutting up, I'm saving the NHS a lot of money. So you want impacts? Okay, we can go down that route. And if you were going to treat me like properly, you'd have to have an SLA in and you'd have to pay me a lot more to do that kind of reductive behaviour. So when you give me £5,000, I'm always going to over-deliver and over-promise, because that's what artists do. And actually, you will get that stuff. And I'm absolutely up for the rigour and the scrutiny through all of the project, including impact, because I want to show people that actually I never started to try and do something with a group of people or to them, but the results were leaving violent husbands, changing shifts in going on to new skills and stuff. But the other thing I wanted to say was in terms of agency, in terms of agencies, we have, I think one of the things that we do really well hyper-locally, and we've kind of translated that when we've had to work fast, say we've got 5 weeks in South Africa or 2 weeks somewhere, is I get to know the police. I go and call dark bingo at the Stanhope Lunch Club, 87 number of crunches in Hilda's hip today. You know, I go and do this stuff all the time so that I don't expect something back by flying in. And I can feel that you do that as well, that we're embedded there. And then we can ask for those things. So when I wanted to put 55 massive posters up on the hoardings illegally, the police went, it's fine, Stan, as long as they're only up for a week. Because that was the relationship we had. So there are other people in our communities, strange and wonderful people, that can come and be those allies and find pots of money or balls. I know where all the guys that have steel drink. So if I want 2 tons of steel for, you know, and it's a great night, you know, the creativity starts over there in that pub.
I just want to say one thing, and it's entirely in response to Sandra's work. The other thing I remember that we're trying to do is we're trying to make different art. And we're trying to make art that's exactly what you described. Not, I am an artist, I have an idea, can I engage you on my way there, which is secretly, will you be my audience? That's what we mean by it. That's what happens all the time. What we're trying to say is, this is a thing we could make together, and we don't know what it's going to be, and we don't know what that thing is in the end, and let's find out on the way, which is why the process matters, and it's why I have to say I don't know what the methodology is, other than keeping saying I don't know, and I'm fine with not knowing. But that when we get there, we'll have a little look, and we'll see what we did to get there, and then we'll find out what it is, and it will be self-sustainable because of the thing it is. That's what we want to change the nature of the work we make as well.
I'm really struck by a couple of observations and a question, just to turn our question on its head a bit. I mean, one of them's about, we started with, you know, is what do we mean by co-construction? And this is just such a general term that covers so many different things. And in a way, it doesn't tell us anything, because we really need to analyse these processes in terms of who is actually performing what role, at what point, using what kind of knowledge. Because if we do that, we'll see that actually at points we may be doing something together, and at points we're doing something apart. And that struck me as interesting, because when you were asked about your experiences of working with academia or what you get out of it, these are quite traditional roles. You want validation, partnership. This implies that there are boundaries that work sometimes between our different spheres of knowledge. So my question that comes out of that is, we've all been talking about the limits of co-construction in terms of getting the barriers out of the way. But another way of asking that question is, where should there be limits? When should we stop? And what do we need to do separately as well as what we need to do together?
Is this the final?
That was my final parting thing, so I'll pass over to you.
So I think we do need to go to timetable. So just ask everybody to in the non-panel to reflect on that. And I just want to say, as my parting shot, something about roles. I think divisions of labour are really important. It's frustrating as an academic to be asked to go and co-construct or co-produce in ways which don't necessarily show academic skills and the contribution that academics can make through reflection and distance. So it's important to get involved, but distance is also important. And if you're hearing about doing immediate stuff because this is the nature of your world, it's also useful to have people who stand back and look at the world in a more glacial way. So that's one thing. And not all types of academic research are the same. Evaluation is not the same as research, in my view, without wanting to rank them. But the final thing I want to say is about opportunity and power. So you're talking about lots of great stuff that goes on, and basically you're working at changing people's lives at the local level, micro level. These are local power structures. I think you're missing an opportunity by saying it's all about process. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just letting it happen. Because the key thing for me is joining up these local power struggles with the things that make bigger changes at other times. So you've got to relate the local to the structural. And that requires the creation of a narrative where artists are respected for what they do, and they don't overproduce for poor return, or they're not expected to. And in that case, artists become something different. And that's where your open democratic art is for me, in terms of being sort of radical rethinkers of society, linking the local to the structural.
think you'll find we are. No, I mean, I think some people are. And I mean, for me, my rounding up is I've been really challenged by coming here. I had a dark night of the soul about having to write anything, and then it got lost in the ether. So it's good, you know. No, I've got massive kind of issues over writing, let alone obviously not about talking. So for me, it's really, really good to hear other people's perceptions, and bring it on. Let's do more work together. And I don't resist academics. I've just had some particularly bad experiences of being subsumed in their lies.
I find it quite. I'm just reflecting a little bit on your question, Beth, about what limits are useful to have in place, and also a little bit, Andy, on what you were talking about. I mean, the work that I did was very much focused around trying to build in some kind of a framework that had the flexibility to allow the creativity and that co-construction, whilst also hitting some of the city council agendas, some of the national agendas around localisation and around community-based budgeting and all of those kind of things. And I think where we struggled was that it was about having, like I said before, having the resource and having that energy to keep it going, to keep people informed, to bring people along on the journey, and for them to then own it and then run with it, even in an environment like Balsall Heath that had such huge amounts of community activism anyway. But I agree. I think I wouldn't necessarily say limits or barriers that we need to keep in place, but certainly I think looking at what kind of frameworks work really well, that are flexible and movable according to the needs of each community.
I think for me, I'll have to answer my own question then. So the limits to co-construction on or for any particular group that's involved in that process, and the limit is not enough time to actually be part of a journey, an equal journey, where people who arrive at a group, you know, hoping to have a lovely experience and learn a skill and make something together and, you know, share each other's worlds and lives and laughter, you know, that's much more honoured the more time they have to enter into a truly, thoroughly co-constructive process. But that sometimes it's okay not to.
I remembered another thing that we're doing. It's unearthing stuff. It's already there. People are already doing it everywhere. People are already doing all the things we're talking about, all of us. But they're not necessarily getting noticed because they don't have a voice. And our political point is that our Fun Palace campaign is happening exactly 7 months before the next general election. And we know it, and so do they. I don't know about the limits, and I don't mean I don't know because I'm being naive or disingenuous. I honestly don't know because I haven't done this before. That's why I'm welcoming anyone in, and I'm really keen that we work with anyone who wants to work with us. All of you can go home and find out where your closest fun palace is, because they're all on the map. And maybe if you want to work with them, work with them. I think they'll say yes. We know how much we don't know because we're doing a new thing. That's an old thing. That's unearthing another thing.
There are no limits to co-construction. Simple. You can do as much as you want, as often as you want, and the best projects are those that are not got any funder involved in them, where you've just sat down, had a conversation with somebody, you've come up with an idea, and you've just rocked off with it, and you're still doing things. And in a lot of ways, the projects that I'm still involved in have come out of that. The Music Archive, we've spent 11 years as just a group of us because we wanted to do it. We've got 2,500 members online, 2,000 members on Facebook. Everything about that site is user-generated. They're not our stories. We're not telling people what that heritage is. They're deciding what that heritage is and having those conversations. We're only just now thinking about legalising our status. Other than that, it was just a group for 11 years. So there are no limits, and unfortunately, it's the funding streams that put the limits on it. And I'd love to say, you know, let's stop all this. You've got 12 months worth of funding. Because by the time you get it, you've not got 12 months to deliver it, and then they're threatening with taking it back off you because you've not finished it. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But equally, I also wanted to make another point that's gone right out of my head, so I'm going to shut up.
I think sometimes the limits, we self-inflict some limits on ourselves into who we want to work with. Sometimes, if we concentrate just working on deprived neighbourhoods, the fact that there's a wealthy neighbourhood next door that we could actually be working with and bringing assistance in. Well, one of the things we always try to do is break down the barriers between them and us. From personal experience between social housing and private housing, brand new developments, yuppies moving into areas of regeneration. And so I think sometimes if you work in that community, you just become inward looking, and I think it's quite important, and these sessions are quite important, that we talk about these issues. And just in terms of language use, as an editor of a magazine, whenever I ask anybody from the university, especially professors, to submit an article, we always say, can we have it in human speak, please?
So in human speak, we have run out of time. Thank you very much, everybody who has participated in the panel and everyone who's contributed thoughts and discussions. We shall be at our stands, respectively, if anybody wants to carry on the conversation. But we have to close for now. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for all our panel members.